Hello and welcome, everybody. We are so glad you're here. My name is Barb Patterson, and I am on the board for the Insight Alliance. And I just want to take a moment and kick us off tonight, sharing a little bit about the Insight Alliance for those of you that aren't familiar with our work. The Insight Alliance works with in the prisons and in the communities here in Oregon, and really with a very powerful yet simple purpose, which is to end recidivism. They do this through programs that point people to their innate mental well-being and helping them discover that everything we need to thrive and to do well in the world already exists within us. People go from experiencing themselves as damaged and a liability to realizing their essential nature and their essential inherent worth and value, and what they're able to do both while they're in prison and when they leave prison has been amazing. We've seen some really profound results. You can go over to the website to hear more. You're going to hear some of those stories tonight in the panel. And tonight, as part of our fundraising week, we really wanted to create a space and an opportunity for us to have an honest conversation. A conversation where we can explore in a very personal way and a close to home way here for those of us in Portland in particular, about the impact of our current criminal justice system here and ultimately around the US. This panel tonight, though, includes individuals that have experienced incarceration for themselves, as well as individuals who have dedicated their life work in one form or another around the criminal justice system and the law and serving those individuals and their communities that have been impacted. You know, this is without a doubt a very complex topic and discussion. It's a very sensitive issue. While we do not expect in this short period of time to answer, all the questions out there, we do think that it is absolutely possible to have a heartfelt conversation together. And that's our hope, is that we're able to remember that this isn't just a criminal justice issue. This is a human issue. And I just, with that in mind, want to start by, before I turn it over to our moderator, Rakeem Washington, just share something. And I hope you don't mind, Rakeem, but this morning he sent us all an email, and in it he said he had, just rewatched the documentary 13th, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. And it reminded him of, how painful our history is here. But Rakeem invited each of us on the panel, and I invite all of you listening as well, that yes, we must acknowledge that pain, but hopefully in this dialogue, we can also seek hope through our personal stories as well as through the actions that we can take. And if you're like me, by listening and learning and asking myself those own tough questions of what I can do to be in support of and do what makes sense in regards to this issue. And perhaps tonight you'll hear a story or something that will inspire you in a very personal way to move forward. So the other and final piece of advice that Rakeem gave the panel was to just speak from our hearts. And so I have no doubt that that's what's going to happen tonight. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Rakeem. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Barb, and thanks Insight Alliance. Special thank you to Anna Debenham for the initial outreach. I'm really honored and proud to join this fantastic group of folks on this panel tonight. We're going to do just quick intros. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll keep it really brief. My name is Rakeem Washington, he, him, his. I'm a former child welfare and juvenile defense attorney in Multnomah County. And now work currently with Portland State University and Portland Community College. We've got about 30 or 35 minutes with the panel, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I'd like to start with just the panelists doing a quick introduction. So Seven, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, Rakeem. I'm Seven, or Keetra Hale. I was formerly incarcerated at Coffee Creek for 6.5 years, and I am a member of the Insight Alliance. I participated in their first group they offered at Coffee Creek, and I continue to work with Anna. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Seven. Kelly, how about you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Kelly Rass. I work with the Department of Corrections, been there for 13 years, so going to speak a little bit from that perspective this evening. I'm a big fan of the Insight Alliance and all the work that they do, and so it's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight.
Thanks, Kelly. Jarrell, you want to go next?
Yes, my name is Jarrell Lambert, Project 180 Coordinator for the Insight Alliance. I look forward to the conversation tonight also because it touches both sides for me.
Thanks, Jarrell.
Yeah.
And then Beto?
My name is Beto. I'm definitely a product of the system. I started at age 16. I did 23 years, but now I run a program. I'm a program director of Breaking the Chains, to where I help men deal with breaking the chains on a spiritual, holistic level.
Thank you, Beto. And then Bhavin.
Hi, I'm happy to be here tonight. My name is Bhavin Singh. I'm the executive director of the Oregon Justice Resource Center, which is a public interest law firm based in Portland, Oregon. We provide legal services to individuals going through the system. We have programs and projects that provide legal services to people who, from arrest through reentry, and various for various sort of projects or programs or criteria in which people can obtain legal services from us. Sorry, kind of muttering it there, but and then we also represent people who've been impacted by the system through our civil rights project. And again, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Bob. Oregon Justice Resource Center does fantastic work in the community. So appreciate you all for being here. We're going to just jump right in. Normally, we would probably spend a little time just talking with each other and getting to know our styles a little bit, but we've got a short amount of time, so I want to make sure everyone has a chance to get their voices heard. And I thought I'd start with you, Bobbin. One of the really important themes in 13th, the documentary, is this idea of the evolution of racism and the way in which it changes shape and form as protests and movements continue to fight and battle against it. At one point, it's described as sort of a cancer that hasn't been fully cut out, and so it just sort of metastasizes in other ways. Can you talk a little bit about that evolution, the way you see it?
Yeah, first I want to say, the documentary, I just rewatched it myself over the past couple of days, and it is as if it was produced yesterday. I mean, it was watching it, like as you mentioned, it is a painful documentary. I think it's just such an eloquent sort of articulation of the criminal justice system and mass incarceration. And really, I think the general concept of it is, mass incarceration is really this latest iteration of racial and social control that exists in this country. And that all stems from this original ideology of white supremacy that this country was founded on, and this state. And so when we talk about white supremacy, I just want to work with a definition that a colleague in Oregon, Eric Ward, he uses, so that we understand what it is that we're talking about. And we're kind of working with an operational kind of definition. So as he talks about white supremacy, he talks about it as a system of exploitation that was created to build American society, an ideological construction built of three things: genocide and stolen resources of Native Americans, exploitation of free labor, Black people through slavery, and the control of sexuality, not just women, but primarily women. So when we began to sort of understand this is how this country was founded, and the systems that built this country could not have existed unless there was an ideology that allowed for the belief that some people or some segments of our population were less than, right? We could not have removed and committed genocide of the Native population if we did not believe that they were not equals, right? Same with slaves. There's no rational or common sense or moral way that we could, or this country could have implemented or brought slavery to this country had it not been for this ideology that somehow created a racial hierarchy, that there are certain individuals because of their race are not worthy or not value or have the dignity of others. And so when we understand that ideology and these systems of control that were created from the outset, what we have to begin to look at is how these systems have evolved throughout history and what is the core ideological sort of drive behind these systems. And so what we've seen and what the 13th does, I think, so eloquently, and what people like Brian Stevenson and Michelle Alexander talk about, is we began this country with these systems: slavery, genocide, reservations, removal, the control of women, or the gender discrimination that occurred. And then we began to see these things evolve. So as the country evolves, we began to see laws and practices that were put into place to ensure not only these populations, but other populations of color. So we see, the influx of immigrants, whether they're Asian or Mexicans, that would come up into the United States for labor. But we began to see laws that prevented them from being able to fully participate in our community. Once we began to see a pushback against white supremacy and sort of the push for equality, we began to see more of a political movement that we define as white nationalism. And that is a political sort of power movement that's really about creating a white only sort of country or state. And so those terms get used interchangeably a lot, but I think, these are good operation or working definitions, I think, for us to understand about how these things may look a little different. And then when we look at Oregon, what we see is when Oregon came in, as a lot of people would understand now, Oregon came into as a state, as an exclusionary state that prevented and prohibited Black people from living in this state. And then what we saw from the beginning or inception of the state, then policies from the late 1800s into the mid 1900s, that again sort of mirrored this national trend based around white supremacy, where we passed laws that prevented Chinese and Japanese immigrants from being able to own properties or to be able to be full participants in our society. We saw, again, with Mexican laborers that were coming up into Oregon in the 1920s, 10s and 20s and stuff like that, that, again, laws that prevented them from full participation in our society. And then we began to see Oregon being a home for the KKK, one of the largest per capita numbers of KKK in the 1920s and 30s. And again, in our legislature, our governor, there was close associations with our government. So all the laws and practices that sort of created this state and helped develop the roots of the state, the foundation of the states, is founded on that ideology. And so what we saw is that sort of mutation from slavery. Then once slavery was abolished, then we had separate but equal, sort of Jim Crow and segregation, and basically entered into this period of racial terror in which we basically, people of color, especially Black men, were terrorized in this country, lynched, murdered, extrajudicial killings. And then once there was a civil rights movement that began to push back against that, we began to see a mutation again. We began to see laws that were neutral on its face, but discriminate, intentionally, disproportionately impacting communities of color. They understood how to create these laws and these systems to look blind, but were intentionally targeted to these same populations. And that's really where we began to see sort of this rise of mass incarceration and, prisons and jails and the criminal justice system. And I think the 13th does a fantastic job of explaining that, especially since the 1970s, and how that system was used to control the population. And I know I'll just finish up here. This is such a big topic to try to, squeeze into a few minutes. But I think the most important thing to really think about is what is happening with this ideology? What are these systems trying to do? And what they're trying to do is dominate and control and terrorize communities. So once we look at it through that lens, then we began to see these systems and how they exist and how that same paradigm of dominance, control, that asymmetrical relationship between those in power versus those not in power, and how it's mutated. So we've seen it with slavery. We saw it with these separate but equal. You can sit here, you can't go here. You can have this, you can't have this. And then we see it in mass incarceration, where we see law enforcement disproportionately with power, right? Guns, now military gear, basically surveilling in communities 24/7, dominating them, right? Controlling them. Once they get into the system, that asymmetry that exists from the prosecution on the defense, it's again, controlling and dominance against that individual. Once we get into our jails and prisons, there's still that same asymmetry that exists. So these are all manifestations of that ideology, sort of tentacles of that ideology that exists in our society. And, the last thing that I'll just wrap up with is, it's this value system that's sort of dominated, and we have to confront that. We haven't confronted it as a country. We haven't confronted it as a state. Brian Stevenson talks about how this idea of truth and reconciliation are sequential sort of aspects, and that we have to first confront this history before we can really get to true reconciliation. And I think what we find so often is that elected officials push towards reconciliation without confronting this truth. And I think this panel is a really great sort of manifestation of trying to begin to confront that truth. And, you know, we have over 5,000 prisons and jails in this country, and then all the related resources to staff that and keep those things, you know, viable or in existence. That is the biggest system of detention and incarceration the world has ever known. I mean, this has never existed, this type of infrastructure. And what the 13th has sort of illustrated is that that infrastructure then can be used against populations that the country doesn't like. And we're beginning to see that again with protesters and people who are trying to fight for different things. We're labeling criminals. We are using the criminal justice system to basically, you know, again, control populations. So, you know, that sort of core value of dominance and control, that racial hierarchy, you know, that root ideology, it just has manifested and continues to manifest. And I think we're at a moment in this country where, you know, we are, I think, trying to confront that. And I think it's really important that we do.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for those thoughts. And that helps set the tone for our next part of the conversation. And, you know, Seven and Beto, I've talked with both of you about this idea that Bobbin speaks of, the idea of dominance and control, and how that continues to exist even after incarceration is over. Beto, do you mind jumping in next and telling us a little bit about your reaction to the video, but then also this thought about how that dehumanization continues even after folks leave incarceration?
Yeah, my thoughts. Thank you, Bobby, for what you said. Maybe you're spot on with it. You know, I could never come near to how eloquently you put that. You know, but it's it was a hard film to watch, man, because, you know, the thing is that this has been going on since the beginning. Even like how they when the European came over here and labeled the native as savages, you know. Then they have all these labels that they keep on, even with the 9/11, you know, they put the terrorism, and they have a way of manipulating, controlling the mass population, and having putting a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to people of color, you know. It's frustrating to me to see the same pattern going on, you know, to where they call me a criminal, an ex-convict, or some things like that. But then when you see a documentary like this, and you see the what is that, CCA, and how they're using the modern day slavery, and just making obscene amount of money hand over fist. I think he said like 11 million a month. You know, the 11 to 13 million a month just for the in-house slavery, or of whatever they're doing. And and when you let us out, that them work credentials, we can't get a job at that place, you know, because they ain't gonna hire us. I moved here from Wisconsin to where I'm a felon. I wasn't able to get no food share, no assistance, no housing, no, and I couldn't vote. I couldn't do anything like that. So that label was still with me until I relocated out here. And there's a slight little acceptance of, you know, they're going to work with you, what do they call it, felony friendly things and all that other stuff. But the label is still there, you know, and it's hard to experience. It's hard to put together in the way that Bobbin said it. You know, it's a lot. It's a lot to comprehend. You know, I get it, but it's tough.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Beto. I think something you said is really important for us to think about too, and the ways in which those labels get stuck to human beings, and how folks who are uninterested in learning more and hearing more about people's stories use those labels to replace any inquiry, any questions, any chance to get to know someone else. And Seven, we had talked a little bit about, in the conversation we had about, I think we both landed in agreement that some of the most emotionally intelligent folks we know are people that have actually been incarcerated. part of what we were
Yeah.
you want to share a little bit more about that thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like, being in for 6.5 years, I met a lot of different women from all different walks of earth and all different spectrums, all different races, and I just know that there are so many intelligent, amazing people behind bars that are never given the opportunity to become more than that. Nothing else other than a criminal. They're labeled that, they're put there, they're placed there, they're not given the help they need. I think my biggest problem about prisons and incarceration is the fact that majority of the world believe that we're there getting help, that we're there being taught, that we're there learning new skills and new things. And I'm sorry, but that is not the truth. I was there for 6.5 years, and I fought for every class I had to take. I had to go to my counselor. I had to go to a panel. I had to constantly put in kites and this and that and fight and fight and fight to be able to get into the classes that I actually was allowed in. And still, majority of the ones I requested, I still wasn't allowed to do. I think for me, the biggest thing is that I would love everybody to become educated. Be aware of what you're being taught, because what people say and what's presented to the world is not necessarily true. And like you said, I think there's so many people out there that are afraid to find that truth and unwilling to, because then they can't use those labels anymore and they can't use that hate anymore. When you bring light to that, it makes it a little hard for them.
Yeah, I feel that. And I think that's part of what y'all are doing tonight is just sort of shedding some more light in areas that need to be seen. Kelly, you have a unique perspective in your role in your work. Can you share a little bit about how the documentary felt for you, and especially given your role, about what things can be different or what things might be working in the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you. So I would agree that the most emotionally intelligent and in some ways most brilliant folks that have been refined by incredible fires, both within the prison, but also before they come to the prison, are the people that I have met that are serving time in our custody. And so it's truly a pleasure to be with some of those folks tonight. I think for me, one of the things that stuck out, having rewatched the film again, is that piece at the end where Brian Stevenson talks about, there were all these kind of moments in history, if we look back on them and we think, gosh, how could someone tolerate that? How would they, I wouldn't have tolerated those sorts of things, right? And so we look back on that, but he leaves us, and the film leaves us with that, that statement that you are living in that time and you are tolerating that. And so for me, there's, one of the things that has stuck with me in my time of, I was not a big Foucault fan, but one of the things Foucault talks about in the book, Discipline and Punish, is this notion of when, as Bobbin was saying and in the film was saying, is when we take what is public and put it behind a wall. And so, for those folks that are here tonight and people that are listening, I, like you, am aware of, we've got 14 prisons in the state of Oregon. They are stuck in industrial areas and behind hills. If you drive on the 84, if you drive on highways, there's these hillsides at night that just glow. And that's, where people are. That's where 14,000 Oregonians have gone, to be held behind walls. And so, for me, I will say, and I think it probably gives some folks pause, but I will say that, one, I am proud to work for the Department of Corrections, which may, feel uncomfortable in this context, and, happy to kind of explore and talk about that why, but it does not mean that I'm happy with the system. Right. And so, a couple thoughts is, one, Bobbin touched on this again a little bit, you all touch on this, is that, we're all hurt by racism. You all know that more than I do in this way, but, we have 4,700 employees for the Department of Corrections. And I will tell you that prison systems are not kind often to the people that work inside of those. And so that's kind of become my focus of work here in the system for the last time. And so this notion that all boats rise when we can heal these original sins. And so those are things that really, I think about in addition to those phenomenal 14,000 people that sit in our custody tonight in glowing hillsides, thinking about the damage that's done to our public servants as well.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think in a lot of the movie, a lot of the documentary, we get some sort of an inside look, just briefly in some spaces of video and pictures of folks impacted. And Jarrell, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about just the amount of pain that exists from viewing that. And so I don't want to leave this conversation on pain, but now maybe it's a good time to talk through it so we can leave with some hope and some resolution on some of that pain. But can you talk about a little bit more about what we were sharing earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Seven. I'll jump in with you right after Jarrell.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said, watching the film, it was very impressionable, as I'm sure it was for everybody. But you have to, something that I've come to understand, even with dealing with the Inside Alliance, so this what makes me appreciate it even more is, like I said, I wanted to respond patiently with it, right? Because on first response, it brings a lot out of you, right? And we can all come up with our own things of how that feels and what that looks like, but it was deep. The thing that resonated with me the most, that I said, that the things that hurt me the most were times of seeing people just being attacked, or dogs attacking them, or they were pushing the brother down the street. He was all by himself. I mean, and it's just like how many. Think about what doesn't get put on record, right? Like I used to tell people too, like even about being a brother that that did 70 months plus of incarceration myself. Like I'm like, I have a record. It's in black and white. It says some things that I did, but there's a lot that it doesn't say. There's a lot that it doesn't say. And there's a lot that we don't get to see in that film. All the way back to multiple hangings, and just the fear of walking around in constant fear. Like that. Those are the things that run through my mind, and it still plays today. And so I just try to remain patient, because that's the only way we're going to come to a practical resolution. Is having some patience. And coming to the understanding that we teach in the Inside Alliance, that helps greatly for me. My religious beliefs, that helps greatly. To try to just not get sucked into the madness of it all, because in a sense we keep going in a circle with our response to it. And I'm like, wait, let's step back, hold ourselves accountable in a way to where we are today, and let's just try to practically come to a resolution, because it's beyond going too far.
Yeah,
it's beyond that.
Thank you for that, Jarrell. I hear a lot of hope and resiliency in those words too. We were talking earlier about just how exhausted physically we were after watching that documentary, and for Black and brown folks in particular, that exhaustion is something that we kind of always carry as we walk around the world. So for other folks out there that are listening to what folks are sharing, I think that's important to think about. It's a sort of a 90-minute film sort of demonstrates part of the reason why there's a lot of heaviness in the world. There's why Black Lives Matter is still protesting in the streets. There was a moment in the film where it's mentioned that for the last 40, 50 years, any moment of civil arrest has been in direct response to police brutality. So some of that pain that is just still there, right? And Seven, you were going to say something too. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that majority of the world is aware of where we've come from, and what's been happening, throughout all the ages and all the injustices and stuff like that. But I think that, like Jarrell said, we've got to come to some type of resolution, and that's here, and that's today, and that's in our present life, and where we all are and what we can all do. And I think that the key here is for us to become aware, you know what I mean? And to come together, and I understand what Kelly was saying, about officers, being put in the same places as us and having to deal with things like that. And, I think it's hard for everybody. I think it's also hard for the officers that work there. But I think that they have a responsibility that we don't as inmates. And I think that they have the ability and the control in certain aspects, that we don't as inmates. And so I think that it's not necessarily fair to view those as, the same. But I also think that everybody deserves to be heard, and everybody deserves to be cared and loved for and taken care of. And unfortunately, majority of the time when we're thrown in prisons, we're not taken care of. And we are taking, the ability to literally take care of ourselves at that point is taken from us. Yeah, that pain, that you talk about, it just travels from generation to generation to generation, and it just continues. And yeah, so I'm not being hung or I'm not being flogged, but when my mom died, what happened? I was thrown in the hole when I asked for help, things like that still occur. And so, yeah, we might not have the scars to come home and show you, because they don't brand our bodies or scar us anymore. But those emotional scars, that pain, that sticks with us, that label when we come home, when we can't find a job and, we can't vote and we don't get housing options and things like that, those all stay with us. And I come home to your community like that, so just remember that.
Yeah.
It's really all I want people to know.
Thank you for sharing that, Seven. I think you're getting to a really important part of why things need to change. Any of us, I think if we paid real close attention, would want if we were asked, we'd say we want our communities to be healthy. And to have a healthy community means you have to have healthy people within the community. And so in a lot of ways, we should be doing more to ensure that those that need access to the things to make them healthier have those readily available to them. And that's job opportunity, that's mental health services, all the other things, reconnection with family, all these things that get disrupted by mass incarceration. We need to have a mechanism to help repair those things when folks are out. One of the things that I think was probably the hardest part for me to watch in that video, and I'd love to hear someone else share their thoughts too, was about 2/3 of the way in, and Khalif Browder's story comes up. And Khalif died at the age of 22, I believe, after spending 2 or 3 years in Rikers Island, one of the most notorious prisons in the country, for a crime he didn't actually commit. In the interview with him, he says, I did not want to take a plea deal because then my story would disappear. And my story needs to be told. And for someone to say that at the age of 20, 21 is one of the most profound things I think I've ever heard. And the amount of courage and heart and grit and resiliency and bravery it takes to say that is just astounding to me. Anybody want to comment on that particular part of the documentary, Khalif Browder's story? It really stuck with me. I'd be curious to hear what folks think about that. Anybody that wants to? Yeah, Beto, go ahead.
I will. Yeah, that was huge because I was guilty of mine. So there's a difference, but at that age to where you're thrown into it with grown men, and you have that battle to hold on to your innocence. And that's the sad thing about it, is like he said too that he couldn't afford bail. You know what I mean? And that's the thing to where a lot of us cop out to pleas, is because we're poor to begin with, and so we really don't have a fighting chance when we're sitting there coming from trauma, figuring out our lives, get thrown in jail for something that you didn't do. You can't bail out to go fight a case, So to have that resiliency, as you said, to go, I think he was like 3 years incarcerated, and it hit me hard, especially when he found out the ended scenario of it. But that, to me, you blame the system. That system mentally destroyed him. You know what I mean? As much as hard as he was battling it, it's like, man, some of us get lost within that system, and like, just going with myself, I did 16 years. I mean, I was at age 16, I got locked up. I did 11 years straight, got out for 72 days, went back for 4 more years.
Mm.
That's how I was mentally institutionalized, and once that trauma hits you, man, it's so hard to break free of it, It was a very touching story. It's very moving.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Your words are kind of have me on pause myself right now, just sort of soaking that in. And one thing you said too that I think is really important, and I hope this distinction isn't lost. I know it's not lost on folks on the panel, and I hope folks watching have a moment to reflect on this idea. But Khalif Browder's story isn't tragic because of what happened to him because he was innocent. It's because of what happened to him when he went to prison. It doesn't matter if he was innocent or guilty. The things he experienced within that facility are outside of the borders of what we should call human. And as Bobbin was saying earlier, that idea of using dehumanization as the primary tool in order to create those systems of oppression are just we can't talk about that enough because they show up in so many different ways. And so I think for a lot of folks, maybe see that part in the documentary and are saddened by it. And their first thought will be like, oh man, and he didn't even do anything wrong. Like, yes, that's a very important part of that story. But he also was treated terribly, and he would have been treated terribly regardless. And so I think that's really important for us to note and think about. Any thoughts to that, Bobbin or Jarrell or Kelly? Bobbin, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that were, I think, important to recognize. One, going back again to this like dominance and control and this asymmetry of power. And what we see is this play out in sort of multiple ways with the Khalif Browder. And I mean, it's one of the most heartbreaking stories. I mean, what happened to him. But what you see is, and I think Brian and others mentioned this, that our system is a system of pleas, not of trials. Over 95% here in Oregon resolve in pleas, depending on which county you're in. If everyone were to actually exercise their constitutional rights and go to a jury trial, it would crash the system. So you have to begin to think about like, what kind of system is not designed to actually implement or effectuate the protections that exist, you know? So that's the first thing. Like, we are arresting and criminalizing people at a rate that is so high that our systems that we've created can't even withstand that. So secondly, you have the issue of bail, right? This is a wealth-sensitive system. This protects people who are rich and guilty more than poor and innocent. And so what we see that is play out with Khalif Browder, this idea that because of his financial situation, he could not get released from Rikers Island. And again, there's that asymmetry, that is the county bail structure. Second, you have the prosecutor, right? The prosecutor is in a position of power, being able to say, we will negotiate something in which you will get this benefit for pleading with us. But if you decide to go to trial, we will penalize you. We will give you the maximum sentence that's available if you are found guilty. And what kind of system is that? That punishes you for exercising your rights, that we value as sort of that is, you know, sort of our whatever, you know, it is the thing in which our country like exists on, right? Like it's our shrine. And then again, within the system itself, I mean, what you saw videos of is both other individuals that were committing assaults against him, but also the people who were supposed to be taking care of him, protecting him, the guards. And so again, an asymmetry of power, one that's created by culture and, you know, just other oppressive kind of things, and another one, the system. And so I think it's really important as we begin to think about how do we change, because this is all things that we've created. We can change it. I mean, this is all man-made or human-made, and we can change this. If we imagine something different, we can create it. Is that when we talk about changing the system, we have to talk about a reallocation of power. If we're not actually changing the power structure, it's not real transformation or reform. So like when we look at like policies or any types of reforms that happen, what we need to ask ourselves, is there actually a power change that's happening that gives agency and power back to the individual, right? To be able to make decisions and have agencies about them, more agency about themselves. Or is it just discretion? So like we have alternatives to incarceration, but that's a discretion of the DA. I'm going to charge this, but I'm going to offer you either prison or community, right? But that's not actually a reallocation of power. The DA still has the power. So when we look at any type of criminal justice reform, I think we need to understand like are we actually attacking the power structure? And then the one thing I want to conclude on is what you mentioned, is our community well-being. For too long, and since the 1970s, we've been in this culture of public safety, where we have this dichotomy of something to fear and to feel safe from. But I think the thing that you mentioned is that the question that we should be asking is, what actually makes our communities healthier? What actually is better as far as our community well-being or the individual well-being? And when you began to look at it through that lens, you began to ask a very different set of questions and get a very different set of answers. And then when you begin to look at our criminal legal system, from arrest through reentry, you realize the social function doesn't make sense then for community well-being. Everything about it, again, is about dominance and control and not about community well-being. So those are just things that, hearing the Khalif Browder one is one of the most, I think, disturbing examples, but a common example in the sense of the trauma that's experienced by people, whether they die or don't, it doesn't matter. The trauma in which you cannot function as a human anymore by going through the system is the equivalent of a certain kind of death that occurs.
Thank you for that, Bob. And that's a perfect segue. We're going to open it up for some questions. And I think you actually started to answer this first one, but I want the other four folks to answer as well. The question is, from each of your perspectives, what do you think is one thing that could happen or that we could do that would begin to start to make a difference? Jarrell, let's start with you. What's one first thing that comes to mind, sort of the gut reaction? What do we need to do?
We need to eat more vegetables. Eat more vegetables. I think that would make a difference. I'm gonna leave it there.
David or Beto, do you what would make a difference in reform of the criminal justice system?
I think we really need to unplug and restart. Rewrite the Constitution, because the Constitution is written at that point in time for that particular point in thing, and it's worded to still hold somebody down, and so restart, refresh, redo, because as much as we want reparations for what it was in the past, it has to start from a conversation. We all have trauma. We have the intersectional trauma, and so let's deal with it, get an understanding, and move forward. Because everything, it has to change, because like Bobbin was talking about, from the origins of Oregon to the Western civilization, it's been no good. Stop, let's rethink this, and it hasn't worked, and let it, we should have a right to be able to do what we were born to do. Very, very indigenous people were studying the stars. We're very in tune to what's going on. You know what I mean? Let us go back to what we're doing.
That's right. I feel that, and I hear in your response the importance of understanding our history, the importance of re-education. Jarrell, I hear in your response, like our physical health is an important thing in creating healthier communities that can respond quicker and better to oppression and the forces and the mechanisms that keep those things in place. Kelly or Seven, do you want to jump in and weigh in on that question? What's one thing that could help make a difference? Go ahead, Seven.
I think a huge difference, like I said, is just bringing light to it. Everybody needs to start taking accountability and responsibility. People that are in places, that can make a difference need to start making a difference, not to put anybody on blast, but in this particular panel and in this particular situation, I do believe Kelly works in DOC, specifically Coffee Creek. I think it's time that things change in there, The women in there have been sexually assaulted continuously year after year after year. What's being done about it? They're being shipped out of state. They're being kept quiet, and the officers are continuing to work there. Do something about it. Give them programming and classes that they need. Bring it in there, I think fighting for it, bringing a voice for it, and everybody coming together to give as much as they can in every aspect that they can, I can just bring voice to the fact that I know, Bobbin's in a totally different spot. He has so many other abilities and he's using those in the ways he can, I hope that through this panel that Kelly has maybe heard something that she can use to go forward in her work, I think it's all of us putting in an effort.
Thanks for that.
Whatever that effort is for you,
I appreciate that, Seven. I think that is a call to action. I hope that everyone on the panel hears that. I hope everyone listening at home hears that. And I've sensed the advocacy in you. And when you speak about your experience, you not only are speaking for yourself, but you're also speaking for a lot of other women and other human beings that you've encountered in your experiences. And I appreciate that passion that you bring to this conversation, because I think that awareness part that you're talking about, for a lot of folks, we have been having this conversation since we were born. For others, white folks in particular, you're just coming to the conversation, welcome. But now that you're here and that awareness is there, the next step is action. And so, Kelly, I want to give you a chance to share a little bit about your answer to that question.
Yeah, you bet. And again, part of, the importance, and thank you to the Insight Alliance for inviting me to be here, is it is to hear, right? It is to take that call to action as when I go to bed every night exhausted and wake back up again, if nothing else, I'm hoping that there's this message that you have allies in this business too, that there are those of us who have committed this as our place where we have chosen to do criminal justice reform. And so I take no offense. You just redouble my efforts, you redouble my will to do that and saying those things, Seven. So thank you. So something that I think, what we could do, and it's something that, God willing, is COVID allows, is to bring people into the prison. I think that that's one of the things, and thank you, Bobbin, and it's something that I share a great deal too, is that this is a system that we made. And again, I will all day, every day, go back and take what I hear and, hold toes to the fire around the system. But we made this system when we built Coffee Creek, some time ago, and the community was outraged. We didn't get to build it as a college campus. We built it as a holding cells, right? And so it is audacious, but nonetheless, something that we ask, is how can we make good here? And so I take that fire to, again, in my place in this role with you all, to reform this system. That's where my responsibility lies.
Thanks for that, Kelly. I'll also just add really quickly to that note that I think one of the things that's really important, and you're seeing it on this panel, and Bobbin mentioned it directly, is we need to humanize more humans. We have a tendency to dehumanize Black and brown folks from birth, and then continue to pile that dehumanization upon them as life goes forward. And some folks get so caught up in that dehumanization, they get so affected by it, that it becomes really challenging to reverse the effects of that. And one of the things that I've always thought was one of the better ways to humanize folks, and this goes to something you said, Seven, too, about awareness. And I think this what this panel is doing is we have to share stories. It's what Khalif Browder left us with in that interview, is we have to be able to share these stories. And for folks that are new to listening to these stories, you have to be able to hear them in the ways in which they're shared with you. You have to be able to listen to them in whatever form they show up in. And sometimes that comes in art, and sometimes that comes in direct advocacy, it comes in writing, it comes in panel members taking time out of their day in the evening to share a little bit more about their experiences. And that's a gift to our community. Whenever folks are willing to be that vulnerable and share pieces about them that are hard to share, or bring back memories that sometimes they would rather not have re-arrive, that's a gift to all of us. So I want to pause. We're not quite done yet, but I want to pause just to thank you all again for sharing those stories. And Seven, I saw you unmute yourself there. Was there something you wanted to jump in?
I think I was just going to say music. I loved that the video had the music that it had with it, and I loved how powerful it was. And I think that, like you said, there's many forms of voice, and I just hope that everybody's open to all of forms of voice.
Yeah, thank you. Are there other questions out there? I want to pause and just check in with Barb to make sure we're not. I can't always see folks on the screen. Okay. Seven said music. We said art. Jarrell or Beto, what do you all do for self-care? Jarrell, you said making sure you're eating your vegetables, and I bet you're staying, you're exercising too. Is that a part of your routine to like keep yourself physically, mentally, emotionally healthy?
Absolutely. I mean, you got to take care of the machine, right? You have to. And the more that I associate, good things with my body, the better I feel overall, with a lot of things, especially with the times that we have now. It's like, man, just looking for an outlet,
Yeah.
a healthy outlet, and now food is comfort. Food can be comfort.
Yeah.
It can be a real comfort.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And Beto, I sense a teacher in you, an educator in you. Tell me more about that. What do you do to educate the folks that are in your circle?
Well, I'm figuring out a way to deal with trauma. My whole life, that when I dealt with trauma, I became a criminal. I became a drug addict. I've been in recovery for the past year. I just took my milestone, and I have a group of men. Thank you. I have a group of men that I call my program Breaking the Chains, to where we have a way of thinking that we have to deal with trauma a certain way. Sometimes we can't cry, sometimes we got to lash out and all this other stuff. But being able to take these men and go, we just went to Silverton, the 10 waterfalls over there.
Yeah.
And we went there with the idea of the releasing our trauma. And the most beautiful thing about it is, the guy told me, he's like, halfway through the walk, I was like, so have you been thinking about your trauma? He's like, not at all. And I was like, that's the thing. It's a beautiful thing, man, because it really helps me out in this whole process of getting my mind right. I haven't seen a jail cell in over 10 years, but I did 23. So it's like, it's huge, it can be done.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think there's something very, very powerful about that reconnection with nature. Very powerful about staying connected with your physical health. Very powerful, like staying connected with arts, music, things that bring you joy. Yeah. Jarrell, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So another thing that, that kind of brings me joy is, like I said, like as we started this conversation, I had one of my brothers who's been incarcerated for about 18 years now. And, and there's some technicalities with his case, and he may be coming home soon, but him and then another brother and another good friend of mine that I was, incarcerated with, he's finishing up 15 years. I was just like, this is just like the reality of, like, things that I go through on an average day, but talking to these guys and giving them strength is a way of coping and a way of helping, because a lot of people feel like they ain't got nobody.
Yeah.
When you're in there, you feel so far away from somebody that's next door to you. I mean, so that's something that gives me a lot of strength too, is when them guys are able to reach out and to call me and making myself available for them.
Yeah. And again, probably disrupting stereotypes. I think all of you sort of describing something different than what folks expect. That we're back again to this idea of community. Like the fact that you make yourself available to folks that need someone to talk to. You reach back in to stay connected to people that you're close to and help build that community, help them find someone that they can stay connected with upon release. I think is a really important piece. And the question, I guess, that I might have for other folks, and Seven, maybe you want to answer this, or something else is fine too, is who else is doing that, right? Why do we leave it to folks that are formerly incarcerated to take care of the folks that are incarcerated? There are more folks that should be picking up the slack. Go ahead, Seven.
Well, I think it's because we understand it best. I think that until you're there, I think until you've experienced it, you can't understand it fully. And I think that, when people are freshly coming out, it takes a little bit extra care, takes a little bit extra time. And so I think that's one of the main reasons why it's so important. I also think that a lot of the time they don't have a voice, you know what I mean? They're stuck back there and they don't have family or somebody to call. Most of the people have just kind of dropped off on them or forgotten about them and the fact that they still exist. And so I think that it's a way for us to have a voice for them, you know, a way for us to carry that on. But I too think that it's really huge that each one of us take care of ourselves. And something that Kelly said, you know, bringing more people in. I have to say that if Coffee Creek hadn't let Anna in, after how many years, 5 years of her fighting to try to get in there, I probably wouldn't be sitting here in front of you today. You know, if I hadn't found the Red Lodge and Trish Jordan, you know, who brought in all of our ceremonies to us as Native women, I probably wouldn't be here today. So the little things that people do, you know, and the big things that people do make a huge difference. And you never know when you're going to be the person that makes a difference in somebody's life that lasts forever. So just remember that when you interact with people, you know?
Thank you for that, Seven. And I think that's a good place to pause for a second. And I hope folks listening heard that thread of community all throughout this conversation, and that if we want to make some change, if we want to have some sort of response to mass incarceration, if we want to dismantle that system so that we have something better, we need to figure out how to create a bigger and better community. And we need to make sure that we're supporting people and helping them be the healthiest versions of themselves that we can possibly be. I want to check in with Barb. I know we're getting close to time. Barb, how are we doing on time? Are we about done?
Yeah, of course. If there's any final thoughts you wanted to say or anyone else wanted to say, we can absolutely do that.
I'll step aside and open up to folks on the panel if there's something anyone wants to leave us with.
I just want to say thank you, and thank you to the folks of Insight Alliance for the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for being here. And Bobbin, I think you wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you, and also shout out to Trish, because like we work with Red Lodge too, and it's Trish and Red Lodge Transition Services is a great program. Bringing in Native community and religious services into the institutions, but despite like the intensity and sort of that weight of the world, like I do feel hopeful. Like I do think like we're at a moment where we get the opportunity. I mean, we get to be the people that gets to reimagine what this country is. We get to be the people that get to reimagine who is American, who gets to participate, who has access, how we think about dignity and value and worth. And so I think that's a great opportunity for us to be able to do that. It's intense, it's chaotic, it's frustrating. There's a lot of anger and trauma involved. We're trying to unwind, like 200 years plus of a culture and an ideology. But, listening to the stories and the other panelists and just knowing sort of where we are, I do think there's a lot of hope. Like, I think our responsibility is really to protect this vision of what we could be for the next generation so they can enjoy it. As a colleague says, like, we get to plant the seed so our kids can, enjoy the shade of the tree. So, I feel very hopeful, even though the 13th was, it's a very heavy and intense documentary, plus all the issues and, mass incarceration. But so I just want to say thank you. And, I hope people do leave with some inspiration.
Thank you, Bobbin. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just take it from there to say I absolutely have. And I think there was the theme of community, the theme of hope, but also I just saw this theme of humanity, and from the film, and I will probably say her name wrong, but Malkia Surreal, when she really said that we have to change the way this country understands human dignity and whose lives, do we recognize as valuable? And that just, struck me again, watching it. And as I listened to all of you tonight share so openly and heartfelt, that's what I'm walking away with. And I agree, it is very hopeful. And I speak on behalf of Anna and the Insight Alliance team. Thank you to all of you so much for doing this for us, for engaging in this conversation, which for each of you is very personal, and we don't take that lightly. And we're really grateful, and we hope that this conversation continues in the future off screen. And I know the Insight Alliance and all the work that each of you do is very committed to that, to the hope that you speak of, Bobbin. So Thank you all so very much. And I would not be doing my job if I also just didn't say to those of you watching, thank you for joining us, and thank you for participating in the Insight Alliance fundraising week. And it's not over. We have the benefit concert tomorrow night. We have a live and online auction that's still up until the 18th. And you can find out more about all of that at werisetogetherpdx.org. And thank you again, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all.